Facing the dark and empty house alone, everything in his life taken away from him, Howard stared out the window for hours on end, wondering why the loving God he prayed to every day at church had suddenly betrayed him. The next day, down in the valley, Walter Shellnut rose before dawn to milk his cows. He lit a lantern, grabbed a pail, and shuffled outside into the frosty mountain air. The cows rose to their feet and mooed loudly in the barn, sensing his arrival. But even as he deftly milked his cows that morning, the reassuring ping of the spray hitting the bottom of the metal pail, he sensed that something was different. Usually he did his chores alone, yet this particular morning he sensed that someone was watching him. He knew his wife was still in bed. Who could it be? He turned around, and what he saw startled him. At the barn door stood a mysterious woman covered head to toe in a long black dress. Her face was indistinguishable in the dim lantern light, but Walter could see she wore no coat to protect her from the morning chill. "Mornin'," muttered Walter, unsure what to say. The woman did not answer. Instead, she pulled out a shiny tin cup and set it down on a bale of hay. It took a moment for Walter to realize the woman wanted milk. This wasn't an unusual request. Neighbors in the area frequently borrowed milk from one another. But the nearest farm was miles away, and from what Walter could tell, he'd never seen this woman before. He filled her cup, put it back on the bale. The woman took the cup, nodded gratefully, and walked out the door. Walter's cow suddenly became restless and kicked over the milk bucket, distracting him for a moment. When Walter finally got up and looked out the door, the woman had vanished into the darkness. When Laura woke up, she and Walter discussed the morning's strange events. Eventually, they came to the conclusion she must be a lost traveler, and an odd one at that. So Walter didn't give it much thought. Until the next morning, when the woman suddenly appeared again, in the same black dress, holding an empty tin cup. Like the morning before, she didn't speak a word, but nodded gratefully when Walter filled her cup, then mysteriously vanished. Like clockwork, the woman appeared every morning for 4 days. On the 4th day, Walter's curiosity got the best of him. As the woman walked out the barn door with her milk, Walter sprung up and followed her. To his surprise, he saw the woman run into the surrounding forest without benefit of a light. Without thinking, he grabbed his lantern and ran after her. For hours, it seemed, Walter chased the woman through the dense forest. Now, Walter was a healthy and strong man, but no matter how fast he ran, he could gain no ground on the swift woman in the distance. As the morning darkness gave way to eerie gray light, Walter felt his eyes were playing tricks on him. For at times it seemed the woman wasn't running at all, but was floating above the ground like some giant raven. Walter emerged from the forest onto one of the logging roads. After the long run through the forest, Walter was surprised to see the woman run straight up into the hills at the same breakneck pace. Out of breath, Walter nevertheless continued after her. Without warning, she veered off into a side road that cut through a dead forest of brittle, claw-like trees up toward one of the windswept bluffs. Walter was now truly baffled. Why was she going up to the cemetery? Walter reached the rusty iron gate of the community cemetery just in time to see the woman standing over one of the headstones, her black dress flapping in the fierce wind. She then knelt before a newly dug grave, and to Walter's shock, vanished into thin air. For a brief moment, Walter stood frozen in terror. He'd heard the old-timers tell stories about haints and witches in the cemetery ever since he was a little boy, but had always just chuckled at them. Had they been telling the truth all along? But then something dawned on him. Ignoring his fear and exhaustion, he sprinted all the way back down the mountain. He burst through the front door of his home, scaring his poor Laura to death. She looked at his panicked face and said, "Walter Shellnut, what's wrong with you?" "Where are the shovels?" gasped Walter, almost out of breath. "They're out back by the barn," answered Laura, still taken aback by his disheveled appearance. "Why?" "I need your help. Hop in the truck. We got to go up to the cemetery." "What on earth for?" Laura chuckled. "Are we grave diggers now?" Walter grabbed her arm and yelled, "I ain't got time to explain. Just do it, please." Minutes later, the Shellnuts roared back up the old cemetery road and climbed to the top of the bluff. As they stopped at the gate, Walter leapt out, grabbed a shovel, and ran toward one of the headstones. Laura's jaw dropped as she saw Walter dig like a madman into one of the fresh graves, Elizabeth Bishop's grave to be exact, buried only days ago. "What are you doing? Are you crazy?" she screamed. "Just get over and help me," yelled Walter. "Hurry!" Giving her dear husband the benefit of the doubt, Laura reluctantly grabbed a shovel and did something she never imagined she'd do in her wildest dreams: dig up a grave. As the two dug deeper, both heard a strange sound. It started out as a muffled whimper, which Laura thought must have been carried by the howling wind. But as they dug closer to the coffin, the whimper became a high-pitched cry, then a frightened wail. The two looked at each other, their blood running cold. "There's a baby in there!" screamed Laura. They finally struck the wood coffin. Frantically clearing away the dirt, Walter ripped open the lid. Inside lay the corpse of Elizabeth Bishop, the mysterious woman in the black dress. On her chest laid her precious daughter Anna, very much alive, crying wildly, and clutched in Elizabeth's hand was an empty tin cup. Hours later, Howard Bishop remained boarded up inside his darkened home when he heard a truck roar into his yard. He instinctively grabbed a shotgun and bolted out onto the porch. As the truck skidded to a halt in front of his door, he recognized it as the Shellnuts. When he heard a baby crying in the truck, his face flushed with anger. What kind of sick joke was this, bringing a baby up here after all he'd been through? "It's me, Howard," said Walter as he hopped out. "Put the gun down." As Howard did so, Walter walked over with the baby. Howard's face softened as they approached, his eyes flashing a joyous and disbelieving spark of recognition. "This is your baby," said Walter, handing Howard the young daughter he thought he'd lost for sure. "She woke up from her fever. I don't know how, but she did." Howard gently cradled the infant in his arms, his eyes welling with tears. "It's a miracle," said Walter, smiling at the sight. "You see, sometimes the Lord does work wonders." This story of the mother who returned from the grave to rescue her child is still told in the mountains of eastern Kentucky.
That concludes this tale from the Moonlit Road. Be sure to visit our website at themoonlitroad.com to find out more about our stories and let us know how we're doing. The Moonlit Road is produced and directed by Craig Dominy, recorded and soundscaped by Henry Howard in beautiful Stone Mountain, Georgia. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.